So, let's get into it. We're going to be doing a review for Attack on Titan, the very final season. This is it. This is it for Attack on Titan. No more Attack on Titan is going to be made ever again, apparently. So this is it. And we did a non-spoiler review, like I said, a couple of days ago. Now we can really fully get into things now that I've seen this show completely. Did a full binge of it, and get into all the very details of season 4, and all the themes. Also, get into where people maybe hated it, where people may have loved it, and the difference between the anime and the manga. So get into all that different stuff here. So season 4 of Attack on Titan opens up really with kind of a role reversal here. We're seeing the Marlians, and we're seeing the Eldians, who are, what I mean, basically, under Marlian control, and seeing what they're doing, working for them, their kind of ideology. And you see this reverse of the situation happening, kind of putting you into the shoes of these people and why they do kind of the things that they do, and how they see themselves, how they see other Eldians, the Eldians who live beyond the wall, the perception there. So it gives you a way different perspective than you've seen the first 3 seasons. And the good thing about the show is, each season it kind of develops into something new. We see kind of different things kind of going on, and almost like it seems like a different anime every time. Um, and I talked about that when we did the first review. And like I said, starts off it's like your traditional shonen there, with this protagonist who's got this chip on his shoulder. Then it develops more, with the war elements, the political elements, and with this, you kind of see that all come to head here with all this matching. So you see, like I said, role reversal here, where you see the Eldians who are under Marlian control. Is very much a lot of the imagery there is going to be very reminiscent of probably something like Jewish internment camps. They wear bands. They're very heavily monitored. Even they're recorded without their consent. They're spied on by the Marlian government. And then you have people like Gabby, who dream is to become an honorary Marlian. And that kind of leads down their path of interacting with the Eldians beyond the wall. And then, of course, Aaron Yeager is also out there being a crazy motherfucker. You know what I mean? Doing what he does in his master plan. So I'm going to pass it to Tim because I haven't heard Tim talk about it. I heard Sage talk about this final season a bit. But, Tim, what are your thoughts on season 4 of Attack on Titan?
I've loved all 5 years of season 4. But jokes aside, I think it's there was a lot of expectations coming off of the source material, and I was really pleasantly surprised with how elevated in basically every regard the source material was, not just visually, but I think they also managed to add a bit more fluidity to the scenes that kind of made what was happening a bit more apparent. So there was a lot less confusion around what was happening, because sometimes you had to go back and reread not just pages, but chapters, because there's so much happening that being able to get it all into panels, it's just a miracle that they did it to begin with. And I was really pleasantly surprised with how they pulled it off, and just how they didn't pull any punches. Like, you got all of the most evocative imagery by the end of it, not to mention the final scene, which just the sea of blood, tremendous addition to it. You really feel the gravity of the situation with just that seemingly simple addition. Something that wasn't they took a bit, they added a bit to the ending, and that I think really did it a solid. And I kind of it's not often that you change something about the source material in the final hour and it works or makes it better, and I think this was a case where it did.
Sage, did you want to get into the differences between the anime and the manga, and specifically the scene between Aaron and Armin, and differences there?
Yeah. So that was something that when the book ended about 2 years ago now, a little more. It's wild to think that. But that last conversation they have in the book feels like half, maybe a third as long as it does in the show. And there's this distinct lack of confronting Aaron kind of with the consequences of what he did, like really admonishing him and kind of driving the point home. Like in the show, it's after Armin has punched him in the face and they're sitting there. You zoom out and you see the sea of blood, and only after that does he say how big the death toll actually was. Whereas in the book, that happens at the very beginning of that sequence, right? When they're sitting on the steps, he says the number. Armin makes one horrified face, and then they just kind of move on from from that part of the conversation. Um, and so that's a moment that's even technically there in both versions, but is just rearranged its position in the conversation to give it a lot more weight. Because then you get an entire sequence of Armin yelling at him, asking why, and kind of just, if it wasn't obvious to certain people, the author is telling you, here's what's wrong with what he did and why you should not look up to this character. And that didn't feel present in the ending, at least not as thoroughly. I think you could pick up on it, you can infer it, but it did not feel expressed properly to me. So it's a big change that I was a big fan of. And then the other part is, at the end of that scene, Armin, he says, "Thank you for showing me the world. I contributed to this happening. I am guilty for this in some part too. We're going to go to hell together for this." And in the book, in the book, there's I think, a very cringy line of dialogue. It's kind of in that place, and he says, "Thank you for being a mass murderer for us," and it just does not, like, I get he was trying to convey the same idea, but he did not write that well. It does not come off good. It feels almost like excusing behavior at it for a moment. And so it's something I'd been sitting on. I hadn't, pretty much everybody I know just watched the show except for Tim, actually, who read the book with me. But I'd been kind of holding back on really talking about that so much, or because most everyone else hadn't seen it. But I was nervous going into that moment. We had a big watch party. Tim was over here for it. A bunch of our friends. Everybody else was only watching the show, and I was nervous going into that moment because I was like, am I gonna have to like explain this? Is this gonna come be as cringy as it was in the book? Thankfully, I think they made a lot of small and big and small moments, additions to that scene that just fixed what I had wrong with this. Same with another small detail of him reaching his hand in the water and pulling up the pile of teeth and hair and actually looking at what he did. It's all those things were not there.
Yeah. I can play the clip of it. Did you want me to go kind of before the punch or after the punch?
I think I think I think just before the punch, like just like right when that
Okay.
happens.
Okay. Yeah, I can rewind it just a little bit. I got a clip right here that
Got to
we
make
could
sure
do.
people can see Aaron as the whiny little bitch that he is.
Okay. So I got it right here.
The best anime to be released ends now. Thanks for the journey.
わかんねえじゃないだろう。僕は許した覚えはないぞ。ミカサの恋心を無限にしたことはどう思ってるんだ。命がけでずっとエレンだけを見てきたミカサに俺のことは忘れろで済まされると思っているのか。少なくともミカサはこんな女泣かせのことは忘れて幸せになるべきだね。まあ案外すぐにいい人見つけてあっさりくっつく気もするな。やだ、そんなのやだ。ミカサに男ができるなんてきっと俺だけを思っててほしい。俺が死んだ後もしばらく10年以上は引きずっててほしい。そ
Amazing here. Uh, so I didn't expect you to say something that pathetic. Wow. It puts things in a lot of perspective there, I think, about
It
just
does.
Aaron as a character there and deep down, you know, who he is. Tim, what did you think about that moment?
I thought I really thought the voice acting, just like having him like just whining, just crying with something like, I don't want her to even move on, like after at least 10 years, like that's peak that's peak depressed high schooler logic. I mean, and that is a good thing to point out, is that these are all children and young adults throughout everything that has kind of happened. And you see the maturation of everyone else kind of going and evolving from this kind of like idealism when you're fresh out of the academy to the stoic realism that their peers had tried to instill in them for 8 years earlier. And Aaron doesn't seem to move past that. Like he does have this kind of stoic veneer after the flash into the forward, but at this point you're kind of seeing that that was just a veneer, that was a facade, a mask, a ruse, and at heart he's just a whiny little bitch who couldn't overcome fate.
Hmm. Um, and when you get into this final season, so you know everything kind of gets revealed, the motivation, a little bit of Aaron of like everything. I guess it was always going to happen the way it was going to happen. It seems like there was no other way it could have possibly, even though that there's moments where Aaron says like, well, instead of letting the Titan eat Bernholt, I let the Titan directly to my mother. So it's like maybe he could have changed certain things, maybe he couldn't change events. It seemed genocide maybe in the story. Do you think it's painted that it was inevitable for him to do it, or do you think there was a way where he could have avoided that? You think?
I think he could have made the choice, but I think, and I really think the fate and determinism element of the story, I do really see it as more of a metaphor for the fact that he can't deny his desire. Literal plot terms, right? It's fated and destined to be, but I think, yeah, I think ultimately it's that he's so incapable of fighting that urge in him to do it, that I think if anyone else had the power, there would have absolutely been other ways that it could have played out. But it's the bootstraps paradox, right? It's the kind of time travel that and it's not even fully time travel because people aren't like moving back and forth, but the style of time manipulation that's in this, right, is it's that perfect circle where whatever, it's almost like if you go back and try and change something, it just causes the thing to happen in the first place, where the time travel always happened. There's never like a version of things where he didn't send the Titan to eat his mother. It's like when you watch the first episode over again with the context of the ending, that's exactly what's happening in that first episode. Is Aaron is he's doing that to himself. He literally has placed the cage of fate around himself, and so in a way it's fate, but it's not, because he is playing an active role in ensuring that fate happens.
Yeah. And with the bootstrap, would that also cover like the idea that something creates itself in order for it to be created? So Aaron
Oh,
was cre-
totally.
Aaron was created so he specifically could go back and then I guess through memories that he could tell his father what to do, and then he can send the Titan after his mother, and then set himself down his younger self down the path of hating Titans, and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah. Do you think a lot of that kind of all makes sense about like with the Titan powers and the founding Titan and that connection, I guess that all Eldian, do you think that kind of all holds up at the end there?
It does for me. I when anytime you introduce any sort of, even if it's like not full time travel, it's just like memory time travel, or however you kind of want to describe it in this. Anytime you introduce that in a story, it can easily get very convoluted and bogged down, and you could even call it convoluted. But I do think the logic still holds up for me. And from some people, it might be hard to wrap their heads around and completely feel like it all works. But I guess I have always found stories that do things like that interesting, and so I spend a lot of time kind of thinking about like how the logic of that kind of paradox actually works. And I think the idea that it is intentionally a paradox is interesting. I think that's what really makes it work.
Yeah. What about you, Tim?
Well, I was really kind of fascinated by how it almost like one of the predestined kind of things that we get is that moment where we see Mikasa cut off Aaron's head, and like hold it lovingly, and we see Amir in the background, and everything kind of seems predestined to get to that point. Like that is a fixed point in fate, and it seems like for anybody who's more familiar with the MCU, then you would more likely be seeing what was it, the What If, the Doctor Strange episode. And like you're kind of seeing how like no matter how many times he changes small iterations, it's always leading to these same fixed points that are immutably kind of there. And like I think it is briefly mentioned that this was the best possible outcome, and that he was kind of like running scenarios, kind of like this couldn't have happened any other way. 80% was like the merciful number. 80% was mercy, and I kind of really enjoyed it.
So what happens here is you see that Aaron, he basically genocides 80% of the planet here. So going into the show when I was binging it, I knew that Aaron would eventually become the bad guy. I thought that maybe it would end the way that he basically wiped out all the planet and he basically won that way. And I guess in a way, I mean, he basically did win. I mean, he already knew the outcome of everything that was going to happen. He knew that Mikasa was going to kill him here. So he basically knew all those steps and knew all the things that were going to happen. And all of it was, I guess, predetermined already. It was fate. Um, but yeah, so you see that, and then you have the ragtag group of team that you see go and like, hey, we got to go save the world. We got to go, save it. Which I'm always a sucker for a ragtag group of people going to save the world. So you have Mikasa, you have Armin, you have Captain Hanji, you have what's left of Captain Levi. I mean, he's held together by duct tape. You get what's left of him. You also have Jean. You also have Connie. And you also have the other Titans in the show. You have the Armored Titan. You also have the female Titan, Annie. You also have the Cart Titan. And then you also have the other members there of like the general of the Marlin Army. I think he was. He got promoted. He was like the
Yeah,
general
General
there.
Magus.
Um, and then you had the two colonized, I guess, honorary Marlians there, Yelena and what's the other guy's name?
Onyankopon.
Anya Capone there. And you see a storyline with them where you see Marlians who came to like invade Eldia, and you see Yelena killed the person in charge of that boat that came to take them over. And basically she introduced technology to Eldians and see how far they were behind because they didn't know what trains were, they didn't know what guns were, they had real no concept of any of those things. So they introduced like bringing technology there, and they worked with Marlians there. They had some, I guess, POW Marlians that they kept on the place as like chefs. And then one character, what was the chef's name? Who was the Marlian?
Niccolo is
Niccolo.
Sasha's boyfriend. Yeah.
Sasha's boyfriend there, which was a heartbreaking story there that we're going to get into. But yeah, so you see kind of they're working together with them, uneasy type of alliance there, and you see what that leads to, which is basically a whole big master plan by Zeke and by Aaron and by Yelena there, and it's basically a triple cross, quadruple cross, basically going on here of alliances there. I was when that moment happens where because it's all a plan leading up for Aaron to get to Zeke so they can connect, so he can have the founding tank power. And then that moment happens of like a initial cross, double cross. Then it's like, you know what I mean? I did this. I was waiting for you to make your move, and then I'm gonna reveal my plan. It's like, nope, triple cross. And then Aaron comes back, and then he reveals his thing. I thought that was such a really great moment. What do you all think about that and like the whole big, Zeke and you see a little bit his backstory, which I thought was great. What they really do these backstories at the very right time to show you a lot of those things. You see a lot of what he did. What did you all think about those episodes there about that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the best stretches of episodes, from like Two Brothers to Memories of the Future to to You 2,000 years ago. That's like a real great kind of trilogy of episodes. The constant double crossing in that last sequence, and you you got to feel bad for Grisha. With not only did his first son turn him in, then his first wife ate his second wife, and then his second son forced him to murder the family, then manipulated his first son. The Grisha almost feels like the one that's been stabbed in the back the most number of times there. But yeah, I love that. I love that. I thought it was such a great cat and mouse game, because even before that, there's for several episodes, there's characters going like, did Aaron really mean what he said? Is that actually like true, or is he playing something? And then they're like, well, is he on our side, but he's just going along with this? What would he actually do if that's the case? And so you're kind of wondering, like, is one of them going to turn on each other? And then they both do multiple times. And yeah, I remember when the book was coming out for these chapters, and people were like photoshopping reverse Uno cards into the characters' hands from some of these images. And yeah, one of the best, maybe the best stretch of episodes, I think, actually, the whole story.
What about you, Tim?
Well, I'm just kind of enraptured by this scene, because this is another example where you see that kind of elevation of the material, where I think they really did the paths true justice in this scene, because this is one of the first times we're getting a really good long glimpse of what all's going on. The other being when Zeke was killed off the first time, when we see Amir reforging him, and just we see the just the frame of him ripping his hand out of the cuff. That's I believe 3 frames on the page, and in there we hear the bones cracking, we see the blood spraying, we hear the screams of desperation as he's raging, literally being bound by fate and doing what he appears to be tearing off the shackles to try to take hold of his own fate. And then it all goes kind of full circle in that, like, all of that determination got him absolutely nowhere. And I think that's kind of poetic in a, because Grisha has been backstabbed a lot of times. Yeah, he's got a Caesar levels of stab wounds there. But Aaron's kind of like a Greek tragedy almost. Like a tragedy pre-written, being played out by actors, where the ending, and it doesn't matter how the story is being told. This guy, the fucking Montagues are gonna fucking be sad. The Capulets are gonna be sad. It's gonna have a sad ending, and it's rather poetic, because we also see lots of other people raging against fate, but also kind of accepting it doesn't matter what the fuck fate is. I'm going to do what I can in this moment now for the people I hold dear. It's poetic.
I think that they have a line of dialogue specifically kind of referencing what you're saying, Tim, where when Aaron and Aaron are sitting in the blood at the end, and Aaron's got the hair and the teeth in his hand, and Armin picks up the seashell, and Aaron's actually notices it, and Armin goes, "You just finally noticed it? It's been sitting at our feet this entire time." I think that's exactly kind of the show saying what you just said, where he was incapable of just living and having any appreciation for existence, even in bad circumstances. Like, he just
Like they
when moments of beauty did happen, he could not value them.
exactly. They get to the ocean. He sees the ocean for the first time, and what's his first thought? If I kill over everyone over there, will we then be free? And that kind of goes that mindset. And we see Amir shaped by violence. We see Aaron shaped by violence. But then you get to that kind of one of the very last scenes of the show, and we come across this boy who comes across Titan or that grave site, that tree, in a tree that at this point in time now looks very reminiscent of the tree the founder Amir found all those years ago. And he's finding it under very different circumstances. He's not being hunted for his life. He's not being hunted for his life. He's just wandering in the woods with his dog, and he comes across a tree. And it's almost like that is some form of promise that the future could allow for the cycle to be broken.
It's a prequel to Adventure Time, is what that was all about.
So you have the character of Zeke, who's the half brother of Aaron. You see his backstory. You see that again shaped by violence. A lot of this pressure put on him as a young boy to be the future of the Eldian race, and that kind of leads him to going like this is a curse, and then he has a form of genocide in his mind. It's just to basically euthanize all Eldians, stop them from producing. To gain what he wants to do with the power of the founding Titan is being able to, I guess, it's like a genie. I guess you can just grant any wish capable, and then he wishes that the Eldian race will be able to stop reproducing. Um, and because you have this mindset of some Eldians that it's a curse, because their abilities to turn into Titans, and I mentioned this in the last review. The Titans in this are basically like nuclear weapons almost. You know what I mean? Each side kind of wants a Titan and the power of the Titan in order to swing the tide of battle, and what can all do. And he just kind of comes to the conclusion just would be good that if no more Eldians ever existed ever again. That will solve you know, not only the suffering of Eldians, but the suffering of the world, if they can just no longer be there. So I mean, both kind of have genocide on their minds, Aaron and Zeke, just kind of different methods of going about it there. And when Aaron completes his plan, uh, he kind of has a something that he probably didn't. A byproduct of what he did of the genocide of 80% was that the power of the Titans was no longer, with the Eldians. That just goes away. And Eldians will no longer be able to turn into Titans. So that's one, I guess you could say, slightly good thing that happens at the end. Amongst all the death, is that the Eldians are free of that curse. I guess.
A small silver lining for the characters that we get specifically come to know and care about. It's a small thing to kind of hold on to in the darkness.
Yeah. So you have that. It's one good thing that kind of happens there. So yeah, I mean, and Mikasa, like I said, ends up killing Aaron, and cutting his head off. And we played the clip there a little bit of her kissing the decapitated head there. Was there a lot of talk about that online? About too much there about maybe it was
There was
weird.
definitely some people that were a little like, oh, just kind of disturbed at how morbid it was. I thought it was metal as fuck, honestly.
What about you, Tim? Right.
Same. I've seen some discourse about it, but when we'd viewed it, Sage had mentioned that is actually kind of prominent iconography in Japanese folklore depictions. The woman of ethereal beauty kissing a severed head, often with a red strand depicted, in this case, Mikasa's scarf.
Yeah,
And the red strand representing the fate now severed.
Yeah, and you see it right there. And it's never been, love in this series, between the two of them has never been like too outright, really. As you see, they mostly just a friendship there. And you see also kind of various other different kind of love stories in the show there, like with Sasha and the chef Nicolo. And that one, especially what it kind of leads to later. So the stuff with, I like how the show kind of built up a lot of these different elements of the victims of war. So you have Gabby, who obviously she has a reason to hate the Eldians because of what Aaron did. You see at towards the beginning of the show in the final season here of he basically commits a terrorist attack and attacks the city of Marlia, and obviously she has a reason to hate them. When she sneaks on to the aircraft that they're on when they're trying to escape, she fires a gun and shoots Sasha, which was fan favorite character. Loves food, obsessed over food, and one of the characters that we've seen since the very beginning of this show. Um, and you see that, and you see her interact. When she kind of goes on the run when she is in Eldia, just so happens the family that she meets is the family that's Sasha's family. And, the family ends up, taking care of her, the children who are Sasha's brothers and sisters, especially her sister ends up, covering for them, looking after them. And then they end up going to one of the worst family dinners ever. I think it's up there with, I don't know what family dinner could be any worse there. They're just trying to have a good meal. They go there and all these discoveries happen. They discover this little girl that they've been looking after killed their daughter. Nicolo, he tries to kill the kids. Yeah, I mean, pretty terrible. And then all of a sudden, they also stumble onto a plot that's been the Marlians been trying to usurp the government there. The Jaegerists trying to usurp the government there, and they implanted Zeke's spinal fluid in the wine, and they gave it to all the high ranking people in the military. So overall, yeah, just terrible time there to go out and eat there. So they discovered this whole plot. So I liked a lot of that element stuff. What did you all feel about like the Gabby character, and then also her friend? What was his name? Blanking on it.
Oh,
Flocko.
Falco.
Falco. Yeah. What did you all think about that, and what it kind of says about war and kind of more the larger political themes of the show?
I think that's really when the story gets to its most succinct at actually expressing what it's trying to say. During that whole sequence when everything comes to a head, Sasha's father has that whole speech about how war is like a forest and we have to get the children out, and that's kind of almost all that should matter to adults in these sorts of situations. That's how he kind of convinces Niccolo to let it go, and that moment is what really starts to untangle Gabby's brainwashing and make her just really like it just breaks the wall down for her. I think she is one of the best written characters in the story. I think she's got one of the strongest arcs out of everybody because it actually takes the time to explore someone being broken free of hate and that kind of brainwashing and bigotry that she's had instilled in her. And that is, I think, with how dark this show gets, that's something that I think is a hopeful and positive element that it's possible to come back from those places and you can pull some people at least way of
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah. I have the clip right here, and I'm gonna give it to Tim after I play a little bit of this clip of Sasha's father here.
そこまでです、ブラウスさん。刃物を置いてください。
サシャは狩人やった。
はい。
5名頃から弓を教えて、森で獣をいて殺して食うてきた。それが俺らの生き方やったからや。けど、同じ生き方が続けられん時代が来ることは分かっとったから、サシャを森から外に生かした。で、世界はつながり、兵士になったサシャはよその土地に攻め入り人を撃ち、人に撃たれた。結局、森を出たつもりが、世界は命に奪い合いを続ける巨大な森の中やったんや。サシャが殺されたんは、森をさまようたからやと思うとる。 せめて子供たちはこの森から出してやらんといかん。そうやないと、また同じところをぐるぐる回るだけやろ。だから、過去の罪や憎しみを背負うのは、我々大人の責任や。
ニコロさん。
So,
Only good parent in the whole show.
what are your thoughts, Tim?
Well, first of all, I'd like to point out how great, in hindsight, the name Falco is for what his final Titan form managed to be. That aside, I thought they were a good contrast to each other. Falco more readily able to see how they're being used by the government, and how because he's always kind of focused on this mortal cost of being one of the Titans, and how it limits the lifespan, and how the government is kind of using these kids more or less. He's more readily accepting of that and more readily able to move on, but he does have that kind of sense of guilt about the cost of a human life. Whereas we see Gabby's incredible hesitance to it, and that scene really displayed that with quite a bit of grandeur, because you really see the look of horror in her face as she's fully expecting to be killed, as she would have killed someone else. She would have absolutely used that knife in that instance. But she sees this man that defies all expectations of everything that she had ever been taught growing up. A man that is her enemy, who by all rights should have killed her, and he spares her, and then goes so far as to say children shouldn't be involved in war at all. And it further just careens her off this. And I think all of that is perfectly juxtaposed by one of the final frames we get of Gabby and Falco, which is them planting a tree, doing the exact opposite of what we see them in the first time we very see them, which is in the middle of a firefight and just killing enemies by the hundreds and thousands.
Yeah. And Falco and Gabby, they're warrior candidates, as they call them. So they're the people that are training to one day inherit the titans of other people. Because if you have a titan, you're only going to live 13 years. You only have that amount of time, and then you eventually have to pass it on to someone else. A tradition that started, I guess, what they say 2,000 years ago with Ymir, where she had children, and then her children inevitably ended up eating her and eating her spine and consuming her in orders from the king and things like that. Um, so it's basically a tradition that's existed all this time. That's why a lot of the Eldian people, they are called the subjects of Ymir. They all trace back to this one woman here, who was a servant of the king. And you see that the Eldian Empire, all these 2,000 years ago, they conquered, they ruled, they had the Titans, so they were able to do that. So in some cases, the Marlians are right about that. But then the Marlians, as you see in the show, with people like Lelena, that they also did conquering of their own with other nations, other countries there. So they're also doing the same thing, throughout trying to gain more power. Um, do you see that with this, and there's, much dialogue about, sins of the past, and, can you attribute it to people now? There's a big argument that happens when they do the initial team up between like Gene and the general of Marley, of like, well, you did this too, you started it first, when you started it first. Um, so with that, I guess my question would be, do you think the show is not defined enough in talking about that, or is it too clear? Is it too broad? Where do you kind of stand on that? Of it's the show's positioning on that, and the creator. I don't know if he specifically himself has any. You notice any specific stance with it? It's pretty hard.
I haven't read an interview that I could give you where he says has a kind of a definitive take to that question, but for me it feels pretty clear that it's about how to value history while not feeling like you have to punish people for history. I do think that I think it gets that point across with the Megath character right before he's killed off. He does have this moment where he apologizes to all of the kids, or I guess they're young adults by the end of it. But he does stop and he says you guys shouldn't have to suffer for this. But the reason we have to stop this is because we have to remember the history of where we went wrong. We still need to learn it. We still need to have it. We still need to know that this history that led us down these wrong paths there, because otherwise then that's the only way to keep it from happening, is to actually remember it all. And what Aaron would have done would have been to wipe out so much of the world, that how much of a historical record would even have been kept after, if the underdeveloped by 100 years island where everyone was had their mind wiped and there was no history books. If that was the only place left, how long would it be before the fake history that we're told at the beginning of the show just was the actual history, and no one even knew anymore?
What about you, Tim?
I thought it was they really took their time in kind of going and drawing that whole thing, that narrative of like our past informs the future, but we are not defined by our past. But I think they really nail it home, where at the end enough time has passed that, because how heavily do we remember the lessons of the year 1200? We don't. And we see in the very ending sequence everyone growing old, dying. The tree is just relatively the same. And then we see the tree grow absolutely massive. And that's when we start to see the warfare, not in decades, but hundreds of years in the future. There is that violence again, but only because, arguably, those lessons of the past have been destroyed by the rumbling. 80% of the world's history was destroyed. And yeah, on that island, they had been actively suppressing all history outside of the history that they wanted people to believe. So you're willing to believe maybe they had a royal library, kind of like the Pope's private library. But that's just one small cache in a world full of history that's now lost as a result of it. So needing to understand our past is also kind of really important to the story, because they're chasing their own tails until they get to the basement and they start to learn some of this history that's been otherwise suppressed. And once they do that, that's the catalyst where the show kind of has this almost shift, where it's not just about trying to survive. It then becomes trying to preserve their future and actually take proactive measures. And that can only happen once they're aware of everything that, is happening as a result of what has happened.
And you see in the show, like, nations were, I mean, LDO was under threat. There are nations that were coming after, as we see Marley, for instance. And Marley was going to join up with other nations to conquer it. And then in a straight up war, I mean, as we see how underdeveloped LD is, there was no chance that they were going to survive in just a straight up war with them. As technology, just technologically, just at a disadvantage they were there. Even with probably the Titans, they probably weren't, because they also had Titans of their own. So you do kind of see that. So in terms of, you could say that maybe they had to respond in a certain sense. And the show does have times where, yeah, I know that there's been some criticism as far as a lot of fascist leanings maybe of the show. Maybe it is, somewhat pro-fascist in a way. I know that's been thrown out there about the show. Do you all kind of see that with the show at all? In some ways, do you think it endorses fascism in a way?
I've definitely read those statements. I really don't think so at all. I mean, people are, entitled to interpret it how they want, but I think it's everything to be a condemnation. We've had this conversation once before, where I do think that people just are determined to learn the wrong lessons from things sometimes. Fight Club, Breaking Bad, Attack on Titan. Now you can throw into that category, where people will go into a thing and they will come out basically with the complete opposite of the intended message. this may be an extreme example, but it makes me wonder, like, could just the wrong enough person watch Schindler's List and then come out of that with the complete opposite perspective than what I think we would all say that movie's point is obviously.
So what I mean, I asked this question to both of you. I'm gonna go with Tim here for a second. What do you think it is about Aaron Yeager that makes him so identifiable with, you think, the worst people? Is it because he's a guy? Is it because he's hot? I mean, he's got the abs, he's got the flowing hair, and he's got the man bun. I mean, what what I mean? What is it about him that you think that a lot of people go like, this is my guy? You know what I mean? This is my anime god.
Well, I'm sure there's people out there that find him attractive, but I think ultimately it's about and I think this is shared a lot amongst a lot of shonen protagonists and amongst even some seinen protagonists, which is they start off in a position of no power. He is starting off the show having everything he's thought that he considered himself to have taken away, and we see him through sheer determination, or what we see as initially sheer determination. Now we know it's predestination, but we see him forging himself into somebody that can change his own destiny and taking it into his own hands. And I think that's what a lot of people relate to, because that is an aspiration a lot of people have, the ability to change the conditions that we are born into that otherwise shape or destroy our lives in a variety of ways. And I think when you see Aaron doing that, up until we see like the ocean, that he's on this constant kind of upward trajectory of trying to do the right thing, find the moral answer, and do with sheer determination the impossible. And then we see that flip, and people are really sentimental. We're a real sentimental bunch, especially when it's a gradual decline in morality, like what we see with Walter White in Breaking Bad. He starts off, noble intentions. The downtrodden teacher wants to, just through determination, build something that he can be proud of ultimately. And we see his we justify actions in everyday life for our own purposes, but in also the characters that we love, we are willing to be like, all right, well, I can't say I would have done any better in there. And you start making more justifications as a character fucks up more. And then eventually you are defending somebody who is whipping up nationalist zeal in order to kind of just like, all right, yeah, I've seen the world outside. It's bad. We got to kill them all. Kill everyone from out there. We gotta it's bad. It's all gotta go.
Yeah.
And when a character is saying that and people are still identifying, that's when it's okay to kind of be like, okay, yeah, it's just a character show. But at the same time, you start to wonder, like, all right, if you have a best friend and your best friend then kills several people, how pro your best friend are you going to be after that, especially after it's like hardcore proven that they killed 80% of the world? And he's like, oh yeah, I killed 80% of the world. Armin does a pretty good job of saying, no, that's Armin, I think, is the conscience, the voice of what we're supposed to be kind of thinking, like, hey, this is pretty fucked up. You're going to hell for this. I mean, I'm probably going to hell too, but you're definitely going to hell for this. And then you also see people defending, like, just because you see this kind of taking apart, like, all right, the Jaegerists were obviously bad. And then people are saying, why? They were just trying to be good for their country, and they were trying to like protect Eldia first. And or I guess I'm a Jaegerist then. And then you're just like, okay, well, that's acknowledging that the problems are there and then still kind of siding with that imaginary faction. So it's both a mixture of how seriously do you take somebody siding with arguably nationalist undertone faction, or just where do you go from there?
Yeah.
I know some in some history books, some German officers that said the exact same things that people are saying about those characters too.
And yeah, I mean, and you see Aaron Yeager, you see throughout the show. I mean, he's got some, I think, respectable qualities at the beginning. I mean, he's determined. Like you see with many shonen protagonists. He's hardworking. You see that when he tries with the ODM gear and he, you know what I mean, wants to be serve in the military there. Um, he's not particularly, I don't think the show shows he's particularly talented at anything really all that much. He's not particularly very smart. He's not like Armin or Mikasa, who I think, Mikasa seems like she's naturally gifted or naturally talented, and Armin seems like he's naturally very smart. And you kind of have people like that in the show. So I don't think he's got that going for him. At least with Walter White, I mean, the guy was very incredibly intelligent, and you see him kind of working his way up there. Same thing with characters like Rick from Rick and Morty, like obviously super genius there. So they got some kind of skill there that you can see like why are in their position they're in. And then with Aaron, just seems like he kind of got gifted this, what I mean, abilities that he has. He just was so, I guess, well, I don't know, you say fortunate, but he just, was being in the place of having these godlike powers there. It just was in the hands of someone like him who's, kind of disturbed, I guess is the best way to put it. Yeah. If you put it in the hands of someone like, I don't know, Mikasa, would the outcome have been different, you think? Would it have been if you put
I
it
think
like,
so.
yeah. Probably
It still might not have been good, but I do think it would have been different, at least less bad.
She would have did at least like 30% maybe, and not, you know what I mean? She would have did at least 30%.
I think she would have.
that's-
I think she would have gone with Zeke's fake plan, right? That he first proposes, where he's like, "We're gonna just destroy a bunch of armies and military outposts, and then stop there." I think that probably would have been her.
Okay. What about you, Tim?
I think Mikasa would definitely have a more controlled approach, because that seems to be kind of her hallmark as a character, that cool, measured approach. We see her lose control only a couple of times, and typically it's because of things related to Eren. So I think she would have definitely gone with the more measured approach. Armin, I'm confident if they would have just given Armin the power, he would have figured out a way to make it so that everything worked out, because that seems to be his superpower, is figuring out what was previously impossible. Mikasa's superpower is being really good at killing Titans, and Eren's superpower is being incredibly average but with really good nepotism.
Yeah.
Nepotism. Aaron's a nepo baby.
Yeah, he's
Well,
a nepo
I
baby.
do think if there was a skill maybe to ascribe to Aaron, and maybe skill's not even the right word to describe it, but I do think there is something about that determinism and passion that is, with a lot of, not great historical figures, is it's almost like a social skill to develop a cult of personality. And I think like the Jaegerists obviously are a clear example of that. But even if you go back to the very beginning of the story, just when they're in the academy doing the training, and at that point seems pretty black and white, right? There's monsters and people fighting the monsters, but he gives a speech like the night before the graduation ceremony, and the next day all of these people like Connie and many characters that die within those first couple episodes all say, "Oh, after all, I'm gonna go with the scouts," and they're like pretending like, "Oh no, it was my choice to do it. I wanted to," but clearly he had this influence on people just by the sheer kind of explosiveness of his expression.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good yeah, he does form a cult of personality, and that's also a common trait amongst a lot of the shonen pro tags, that determinism is embodied by. Like for Jujutsu Kaisen, you start off, you have Yuji as a really as a character that starts off with a lot of enemies, and then gradually he wins them over. You start off in Demon Slayer, where the main character has something that a lot of people are angry about, and then through determinism and bold idealism manages to sway them to his side. it kind of is a common theme where that determinism is a form of charisma that allows you to kind of form your own faction against what would have otherwise been kind of rigid tradition.
Yeah. Aaron is the anti-Luffy, I guess, as we say. He's the negative Luffy there. And you mentioned Mikas's ability to, kill Titans. That's something we haven't touched on the show. Just with all the brutalness of it and the sorrow, being as melancholy it is, all the sorrow. It's got some badass action scenes in it. It is a fun action show to watch when they are killing Titans. And I don't think anyone is better at doing that than Captain Levi. Who I stand Captain Levi. I'm a fanboy. I do
Oh
love me
yeah.
some Captain. And yeah, I mean, you see here, and this is the in one of the final episodes here, where it's his final battle. How he's even able to do this, I have no idea. He's missing how many fingers, and he's missing an eye. But he's still going. But the action scenes in this show, I mean, wow, I mean, really amazing, and they just get better and better as the season goes on. Talk a little bit about that, the action in the show there, and what do you guys think about the action?
Yeah, I mean, I think, on when you're starting the story, right, you don't know too much about it, and maybe you don't connect with the characters on a super deep level, until it's been going for a little bit. I think that's the real hook, right? That's the easy early hook, is to have these creative, fluid, just consistently well animated and inventive action sequences. I remember when the show first came out, and it was like, oh, it's like almost like this like medieval steampunk Spider-Man feel, but there's also a focus on like the resources used to be using these weapons. I mean, it's the omnidirectional mobility gear has to be one of the coolest like weapon sets in like a piece of fiction that I've ever seen. The fact that they could just kind of fly around the way that they do, and then obviously Levi taking that onto a whole other level. There's and I was really happy that there's a guest kind of freelance animator named Irifumi Umai, who basically every one of the Levi's action sequences through the story, this guy would come in and do those, like that Beast Titan one, while the rest of the show is being made. One guy, like by himself, went and sat alone for 3 months and did just this like 2 minutes of animation. And that last shot of Levi dodging all the pieces of Armin's Colossal Titan head that have been knocked into the air, throwing the Thunder Spear, and then Mikasa following through the teeth. So Irifumi Umai had not worked on the final season at all. He had left because the studio changed animation, or this changed animation studios in between the seasons 3 and 4. Went from Wit Studio to Mappa for the final one, and Irifumi Umai had not been involved, but they made sure to get him back for that finale, because what's a Attack on Titan finale without one of those Levi's?
Tim, what are your thoughts?
I think the omnidirectional gear was pretty unique in terms of like Attack on Titan. Like I've yet to see another property use anything even close to the omnidirectional gear, and that three-dimensional aspect to the movement and how quickly you can do all of these movements and things. It really does a good contrast to the slow lumbering nature of the Titans, thematically and visually, and to just occasionally see the power of the Titans overcome that speed and agility. It really provides a sense of almost hopelessness, because we really do see the Titans as these insurmountable beasts, and then you start to see them being killed, and you're like, okay, this is really fucking cool. And then you get the Levi scenes, which are just an elevation, the maximum height to what these omnidirectional gears can do, and seeing the evolution of it with the Thunder Spears, and just seeing what all they can be done with them is, I think, a really fun kind of progression, because it's not something that's unfeasible considering the confines of this universe. Like, it's the progression of technology, which is a good analog for the progression of it, like, because this whole story is about technology and warfare. Warfare with these mythological Titan beasts, or with foreign countries that far outstrip you in technological ability. And I think the action also does a really good job at instilling that kind of brutality that gives it more of that scene and feel, because you have a lot of the most popular shonens don't kill a whole bunch of people, but Attack on Titan really fucking does. They kill anybody and everybody that you see on screen. No matter how long they've been there. It's just like, sure, we're gonna have a kid show up and shoot her in the stomach, and we're gonna have her bleed out. Fuck you.
What death do you think hit the most throughout this entire series?
I'd say Sasha, arguably.
What about you, Sage?
I'd say either Sasha or Hanji. I'd say one of those two. I think with Sasha, it's really effective because
He's coming back. Yeah, you just went out there for a second, but you're back.
Okay. There was she was just very much a side character, a member of the supporting cast, likable, sad to see die, but I think it's also in how the plot elements, Gabby's journey to kind of break her brainwashing open, Nicolo's character, the rest of Sasha's family. There's so many little elements that are only possible because Sasha died, and so she almost for dying had a bigger impact on the story than she did any time that she was alive. And I think when you can use a character's death to play so many themes out and tie so many other characters together later because of that event, I think that might make it might be what makes it the most impactful.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that too. I think Sasha's death and Commander Haji's death are probably two of probably the most emotional deaths I think you see in the show there. And overall, I mean, death in the show, when it's the horror element, when you see people get eaten by titans, it's always brutal. It's always rough when you just see them get ripped apart there, and eaten. It's I don't know. It's like what you do with I don't know. That's why I used to do with the gummy bears, like just bite the heads off. You know what I mean? Or Sour Patch Kids, you just kind of twist them and kind of rip them apart. It's like damn. So that's always really rough there when that happens. Yeah. So, kind of wrap this up, Sage. I know you said it before, but get your kind of thoughts on it. Um, Final thoughts on the season. Your final rating for it, and what'd you think about the ending? Is it probably one of the best endings in anime?
Yeah, so I mean, my score's not changing, right? I'm keeping to my this is cinema. For me, it's a masterpiece. And like I had said before on the non-spoiler review, that does not mean that there are no flaws, but I think that the positives overwhelmingly outweigh the flaws that do present themselves. I think the ending does a great job of tying all the thematic elements together really well and expressing its points in a way that is very pointed. And I could understand for maybe some people being a little unsatisfying in how bleak its points can be, but I think it's true to the story that it was telling, and I find that to be very satisfying. So it is one of my favorite of all time, probably my absolute favorite for anime. And yeah, I think they totally stuck the landing. Not with issues with the book version of the same part, not with.
All right, Tim.
I would have to agree with that rating. I'd say this is cinema because from start to finish, the story is planned. There are some finer details that never get quite as defined, but when you're introducing things like mythological shape-shifting titans and things, you're going to end up with some answers that don't quite have as much of a concrete solution to them. I really like how full circle everything comes. I'm a huge fan of circular storytelling in that regard, where like they just presented so many different story elements, and I think followed through on a remarkable amount of them. Every character that is alive at the end, I feel, got a satisfying resolution. Uh, and there's honestly not a whole lot I could think could be changed to make it better. It's one of those rare instances where you see a true elevation of the source material, and it's one of the things that I wish would happen for every anime that we have. Like any anime that gets, or any manga that gets an anime adaptation, I feel like should have this standard held to it.
So before I give my review, I'm gonna get into some different opinions of the anime. Pull up some people who didn't like it so much. Get you guys' thoughts on it. See what you say.
Sure.
But generally, would you say that the reception to the finale has been positive? Generally?
From what I've seen, yeah, it seems pretty overwhelmingly positive. Which is funny because when the book came out, and like I said, I had issues with it. There was a very large negative reaction to the manga, and some of that's probably some of it's because they did rewrite some of it for the show. Some of it's because you have the music and the voice acting and the pacing of the show to kind of smooth out rough edges, which I think needed to happen. But yeah, I mean, I've heard some of the opinions of people that don't like it, and even if I don't agree, hey, they are entitled to feel how they feel.
Let me see. Let me pull up this one here. All right. So, it's from a YouTuber here. I don't know how much you guys can probably. Let me zoom in a little bit more here. It says here, so just finished AOT. Spoiler alert: ending still trash. They tried to tweak it to make it less trash. Every tweak they made proves every point I've made about Aaron. No more. Thank you for being a mass murderer. Armin calls out the utter stupidity of Aaron's action, and Aaron is like, "Yeah, you're right. I'm dumb. I just love genocide. Genocide, lols." And they said this will at least quell some of the people who legit think Aaron was right in his actions, but it's still a trash ending to an amazing piece of media with awful politics and themes. And this is from a YouTuber by the name of FD Signifier there, who very has a lot of hot takes on Attack on Titan. Do you kind of see like kind of a little bit what he's saying there a little bit, or get his point of view
I
there?
I see it in the book more. Like I there because with the whole "thank you for being a mass murderer" line, I found that super cringy, and I did feel like Aaron as a character was not admonished right strongly enough. And that was an issue I really did have with how the story ended in the book. Like I said, for me, the anime kind of it smoothed that over and it kind of corrected it for me. Um, so I don't really have that issue anymore. Um, you know, I can understand the perspective, right? If I try and frame it in a certain context. But I don't really, yeah, I don't vibe with it, I guess, or feel it, on that level. But again, if it doesn't do it for you, it doesn't do it for you, and that's okay.
What about you, Tim?
I do understand, especially the earlier part, which is in changing that last bit, they are kind of admitting, okay, we did have the wrong tone there. We did have an unintended perception of what we were trying to say. And I think that's another thing that the anime did better. Another kind of example of that elevation, which is you took something, admitted its flaws, and then slightly improved upon it. And I don't agree that it was a trash ending, but I do agree in the part where he says it's an amazing anime. And I really do I am familiar with FD Signifier. I've seen quite a few of his takes, and I do respect his opinion as a creator, but I do have the difference of opinion that I do think the ending had everything that we could have kind of wanted or needed to be given. There's answers and threads. I think people would have loved to have seen more, because you kind of always want more of what is at some time your favorite thing. And I think that's where some of the dissatisfaction comes, is not enough plot threads maybe were expounded upon to some people, or perhaps expounded upon too much, depending on who you ask.
So for me, after binging all of it, getting to the ending, I guess for me, I would give it a maybe high tune in peak territory. And why I wouldn't give it a this is cinema, I think like the both of you is I guess some of the certain memory kind of time travel aspect of it. Um, I wasn't too big of a fan of myself, a lot of that stuff. And I think that maybe you could have some of the themes, some of the politics of it. Um, I don't know. It seems more kind of broad, more maybe it needs to be a little bit more specific, and a little bit more stronger in terms of that. In terms of, I don't know, just meaning that sometimes there is a clear aggressor in certain situation, and there's a clear, oppressed in a certain situation there. And you can't always use the, they started it first type of thing and go back there to kind of justify those things and kind of the thinking of, somewhat you have to forgive. It's always forgiveness, to move on. And I agree with that to some degree, almost. But I think it does have a lot of things that you could, but it's good for dialogue, good for open conversation and dialogue, which I think is good there. So yeah, for me, I was kind of give it a peak in that in terms of that territory.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair criticism.
Yeah. So yeah, that was Attack on Titan final series review there.